Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be going over an overview of this ATR-42. So for those of you who are not familiar with the ATR-42, it's a small twin turboprop regional airliner. It was developed in the mid-1980s and it's still in service today with a bunch of different airlines. There have been a bunch of different versions of this over the years, and we're looking at one of the more modern versions here, which is the ATR-42-600. This is a really unique plane. I feel like it's kind of a hybrid between an Airbus and like some kind of Yakolev or something like that, but it actually works pretty well. And for those of you familiar with the Dash 8, this is not going to be a bit of a leap. Let's get started. So climbing into this thing, first things first, is you notice not very large. For those of you who are huge fans of VR flying, you probably tried this already, and you probably went, whoa, when this yoke basically stabbed you in the stomach the first time. One thing I'm not thrilled is the frame rate. I have a lot of aircraft and a very powerful computer, but this consistently makes my computer lag. It reminds me a little bit of the Antonov 225. I'm not sure what's causing that. So on the left-hand side, you'll notice we have a handy-dandy little kind of control console. This is like a little tablet PC. A lot of really good things in here. Unfortunately, the things that I really want to be able to do, which is come in here and click on here and change these buttons, don't work. So unfortunately, whenever we're doing any of our setup, we're always going to be doing it through the regular old panels up to be top here. You have a performance option, which is kind of handy. It helps you out as far as the different modes here. You also, of course, have an aircraft page where you can actually select these different modes directly. I'm actually going to disable the wheel chocks. I don't need those. We have a maintenance page in the event that you accidentally, especially the brakes. And then, of course, you have an options page where you have the ability to go ahead and dial in all the different units. Obviously, in case you couldn't tell, I'm in the US, so I'm going to use things the way that I'm familiar with them. One thing you want to watch out for, and this is kind of an annoying thing with this aircraft, I really wish developers wouldn't do this. Stop doing this, developers. Is they have kind of a funky custom throttle thing going on here. What do I mean by that? So if you take a look at this throttle real quickly, you'll notice that it has a handy-dandy reverse zone. I can actually pull the aircraft. You'll notice I can't pull it into the reverse zone. And you're also going to notice that it has a pretty wide range of motions. When I push this throttle forward, again, my throttle's at the stops right now. If I push it forward, you're going to watch it snap. Watch this. Ready? Click. And you'll notice there's this little line here. Now, this is what they call the notch position. Now, this is kind of your universal, I just need to do stuff position. Now, if I push it beyond that position, we're going to approach what they call, this is going to be the ramp position. This is going to be the YOLO maximum power position. Now, you'll notice, see how it kind of catches when I get really close? You see how it snapped in that position? This is give me all you've got position. And then, of course, if we want to, we can push it past the red line into this. Now, these distinctive little notches here, like you can see very clearly when the throttle locks into that notch, are going to be our different main power modes here. Of course, you have manual power, which you can come down here and use. The problem is if you want to actually use those modes, this is an important point of order here, is you have to go to your throttle setup and you have to actually manually define where they are on your throttle. Like you'll notice right now, my idle position's all the way back on my joystick. You'll notice when I push up to the notch position, click, I've got it right about that particular number now. And there's a little bit of a tolerance to it, which I really appreciate. Personally, I would raise the ramp tolerance even bigger so that it's a little bit less touchy, if that makes sense. And of course, my ramp position's like almost all the way to the tippy top. One thing you got to watch out for with the ramp position here, obviously it can't be your maximum power because that's your maximum power position. So again, using these different settings are going to be critical. You really need to take the time to come in here and set it. Pull your throttle to idle, click this button. Put your throttle to where you want notch to be, click the button. Put your throttle where you want the ramp position to be, click the throttle button up here. And for me, I'm dual axis, so I had to do that twice, as you can probably see here. I've got a really nice throttle, so it works pretty well. Skip that step at your own peril. I had a lot of issues with this aircraft. I managed to flip it on the ground when I was trying to figure out how to set it up properly. Control-wise, this aircraft has got a bit of a mix of things. One thing I would recommend doing right away is getting rid of those items. They're going to get in your way. If you're in VR, it doesn't matter. If you're like me, who's driving around like this with a controller, it's going to be kind of difficult to do. One thing you want to notice about this airplane is since they didn't have as much room to jam all the airliner stuff, it did not stop the developers of the airplane to jam all the airliner stuff into it anyway. That means you tend to get kind of a mishmash of different stuff. For example, if you look down here, we have our two flight management computers, our systems. This is going to be your display unit, all that other stuff. You also notice you have the buttons for your main primary display here. And behind that, you have all your status buttons, your radio buttons. Of course, you've got some stuff for your printer. You have your trim in the middle. You have a big throttle quadrant. Now, one thing you want to notice about your throttle quadrant, by the way, keep the gust lock back. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed in a few minutes. You'll see why. If we come down here, you probably notice that we have ourselves our condition levers. We have no separate RPM lever. Our condition lever, everything is kind of combined in one unit. Instead, on this aircraft, one normally you would have kind of the two, like especially if you're familiar with like what is it, the Q400 stuff like that. Is we actually have a little tiny switch over here that it controls what our power management settings are set to. Now, if you look at this thing real carefully, you're going to notice there's a 1 and 2 position there. That's because you have two separate engines that have their own switches. Now, I've never been able to get those switches to break apart, but it's not exactly something I want to be in the mood for. As a general rule, the best way to think about this is a limiter. People think of this in terms of, oh, I want to go ahead and set this to one particular power. I want to set it to another. That's true, but you're basically telling the computer and sort of selecting the RPM based on which setting you've actually got over here. Now, obviously, if you come over here and go, yoo, and jam the throttle all the way forward, which we can't because of the gust lock right now, it's going to pretty much ignore this and just give you everything you've got. So that's kind of a neat little trick. By the way, don't accidentally click those switches. You're going to do it. In the middle, of course, we have our handy-dandy little weather radar system. It's also a terrain radar. Works pretty good. The problem with it, though, as you'll find out pretty soon, is when you do run it, you have to actually tell the display that you want to see it. So you can play with this all afternoon, and nothing's going to happen on it. You'll see what I mean when we play with that a little later on. On the right-hand side here, you're going to notice you have yourself your cabin pressure controls. If you leave this on automatic, again, the FMS, it'll say the word man. If you do it manually, you simply select this so that you can schedule the cabin pressure. Now, one thing I really appreciate on this particular one is they do give you a normal mode, and they do, of course, give you the backup mode. In the backup mode, you can just with your finger, and I've already done a video explaining how the backup mode will work. Obviously, make sure you have the pressure displayed when you start fitzing with this, but this is a really, really hardcore emergency situation. You have the world's weirdest little landing gear lever. I mean, it looks like a wheel, but it's so tiny. And of course, above that, you have the anti-skid as well as the anti-skid test. Moving over to the right here, you're going to notice that our Copilot's got pretty much everything the same, except they have a couple extra switches. You're going to notice that they have a manual speed target. Quick piece of advice, don't push this button, please. You won't be able to undo it easily. You can use this to define your different speed just by pressing that. You have a barometric pressure setting. You have your decision height and all that stuff, and you can actually change modes by clicking right here between MDA and DH, depending on what type of minimums you're using. You also have a couple different options. In the event that you broke something, you can come over here and pop these buttons. Behind our Copilot, of course, you have a bunch of test switches. These are really, really, really cool. I was looking at these earlier going, I wonder, which one, what's this? What is this one going to do? And you can make a bunch of warning lights come on if you're having a pretty fun time, kind of a deal. On the pilot side, you have a couple different things here. You'll notice you have a duplicate as far as, hey, I'm successfully connected. Sweet. You'll notice we have our speed target and everything along those lines. But on the left-hand side, this is where all your TAWS stuff is. One thing that you're going to run into that's going to make you insane is when you're going to be doing traffic work, you're going to hear terrain, pull up, pull up. If you want to get rid of that, you can just come over here and snap that off if you're doing pattern work. Obviously, if you're doing landings, especially instrument approach, please don't shut off this. You might need that. And of course, coming down here, you have a couple little lights. You have your oxygen mask in the event that you want to have a little bit of fun with that. You can actually push that button. I was expecting that. Again, there it goes, just to make sure that works. Sweet. And behind you, and this is nice and annoying, is all your electrical gauges are back here. Like you notice right now, I have no DC. If I actually flip this over, I've got my emergency battery. You can see I have a little bit. If I switch over to my regular battery here, obviously I have my inverters. Nothing's coming through them. Main battery, I've got pretty good voltage. My backup battery, you notice I'm not pulling anything out of it. One thing you probably observed, though, is I'm actually pulling amperage out of my main battery right now, even though nothing's turned on. I'm not going to think about that too hard because it'll just make me insane. To the right here, we have our nose wheel steering. This is not like an Eastern aircraft. You can actually leave the nose wheel steering button on all the time unless you need to be towed. That's the only time. Right here on our left, of course, we have our steering tiller for the ground. We have no hydraulic pressure, so these will work just fine. And fortunately, the people who designed this plane linked these two items together, so you don't have to worry about running the tiller for the nose wheel steering separate from the those are really, really sensitive pedals. The pedals that you have down there on the ground. So in going above our heads now, things get a little complicated. Now, like I said, I've flown a few different aircraft in simulators over the years, but this one's been a bit of a challenge to get the hang of, to say the least. Up here, of course, you have our ability to put out the fire. It's the same way it always is. Push the button, pull the handle, just like that. We have our flight control controls. We also have our engine controls. Everything is broken down up here, which makes our lives real simple. We have all of our warning lights for our different parts of the cabin and lights and things along those lines. Swinging down here, we, of course, have our handy-dandy little engine. Super simple fuel system. I love it. You have a fuel pump. You have a crossfeed. That's it. This thing's about as complicated as one of the bigger Cessnas. Like, no problem. You have a bunch of different light options in the event that it gets a little dark in here. Of course, you can flip your wipers on. We have our little minimum cabin lights. I think that's kind of cool. And we have the dome light, which is nice, aka they make me blind at night and light. All right, let's go swing to the back here. We have our cockpit voice recorder right up top. I played with these buttons a little bit. Oh, you can't hear me now. Hee 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 hee. Kind of useful, kind of useful. And you have the main electrical power. Now, this system is a little different. And when I say a little different, I really mean a little different. When they made the decisions for this aircraft, again, I didn't design it. They just did things a little differently. One thing you'll probably observe is we have a dual battery setup here. I've got one that's emergency, I have one that's main. The other thing you're going to notice is not only do I have a bunch of things like external power DC, which we'll get set up in a minute, you'll notice that I have a transformer that runs into a rectifier that's going to go into this little true switch that, if you look really carefully, jumps right over the emergency bus and jams itself onto the essential bus here. This is actually basically going to be our backup battery switch, a transformer rectifier. It's very, very cool. Oh, look at that. I was right. It is a rectifier. I was right on both counts. Hey, I know my electrical symbols. I used to teach electronics. But it's very, very interesting the way that this links back into the rest of the system. Now, you'll notice our AC bus here is actually over here. They call it AC wild electric power on this one, which I find it sounds much cooler than it is. One of the things that spooked me about the AC electric power here is the fact that if you're at a specific RPM, you're not going to have AC power. And of course, without AC power, you lose anything that's related to AC. So not air conditioning, I'm talking about alternating current here. But just be advised for that. It is not the end of the world. Your lights aren't going to shut off because it's all DC, but we'll deal with that problem another day. So coming more forward here, of course, we have our different things. We have engine start, world's simplest engine start ever. Basically, you crank this to the position you want, push the button. That's it. Word of advice, by the way, if you're going to get way ahead of me with the videos this week, keep in mind, if you're doing an engine start, make sure your propeller lever, if you have a joystick with a propeller lever, is at 0 before you start the airplane. Otherwise, your condition levers are going to start in the go, go, go mode, which is not desirable when you're starting a turboprop. Below that, you have an interesting switch. Now, I've operated a lot of aircraft over the years in sims. I've never seen one that has a propeller brake. I've had plenty of rotor brakes. What the purpose of this is since we don't have an APU on board, is you can actually lock your propeller and run the engine without turning the propeller, which means you can get electrical power and, yummy compressed air for other things just by locking that propeller blade without chopping anybody up. That's a little weird, and there's a lot of things you have to do to make sure this is set up correctly, but we'll take a look at that, like I said in the other video. Coming down here, we have our handy-dandy lights. Obviously, up is on, down is off. Nice and confusing for those Lufthansa peoples. Coming up here, we have our handy-dandy ELT. We have a hydraulic pressure. The hydraulic system on this one is pretty straightforward. We have a left and a right system, aka blue, aka green, and you, of course, have an electric fuel pump as an auxiliary. If we need to run both systems together, by the way, notice normal brakes, landing gear is on the right system. So if you're in a situation where you don't have enough hydraulic pressure, you start the airplane and get those propellers going, and you forget to come up here and turn this switch on here, you're going to find the plane goes, whoa, and starts running across the ramp. You'd have to do a cross feed to stop that. The nice thing is your electric pump is pretty good. It can provide enough pressure for both. It's just not going to have the giddy up, let's go of some of the other systems. Here's our AC wild. We talked about this already. Coming down here, you've got all your probes heating. This is basically going to be for warming up those little pitot tubes. You got your windshield heating. You know all that. Anti-icing. This is a great aircraft anti-icing technology. They have all the standard good stuff that you could probably expect. I love how side windows is separate from the front windshield. I don't know. It's just one of those things. Coming down here, I love this. We have a no device button. Click, and everything in the plane shuts off, and the plane disappears. Whoopsies. But this is just kind of amusing, no electronic devices. And seatbelts. Don't forget to arm the exterior emergency lights. Floating up here, of course, we had the fire. This is engine number 2. Remember, engine number 1's on the left side. Don't get those confused. Remember, dead foot, dead engine. Coming down here, we have our avionics fans. We have our oxygen system. You will have to recharge the system if you use a bunch of it. Just keep that in mind. Avionics vent, I'm going to leave alone. And then we have the lovely atmospherics here. The atmospherics are relatively straightforward on this aircraft, thankfully. You'll notice we have our 2 recirculating fans, which are kind of nice, and we have our temperature selector. In the event of an emergency, you can crank this thing into manual mode, and you can actually sit here and set it to whatever you need to. Little switch to take a look between the different compartments in the duct to make sure the duct isn't on fire, for example. We have a neat little button that goes to high mode, so if it were like, let's say, 45 Celsius outside right now, and we want to cool off in a hurry, we can mash the high button and get this thing cooling off quick. It's a small plane, so it does cool off fast. We, of course, have our little cross feeds and our air feeds and everything like that. We can see here we can actually cross bleed these in the event that we want to get systems into both packs off one engine, which is probably something you're going to want to do. And, of course, you have your handy-dandy annunciator light here, which if you want to run through the tests. So as you can see, There's a lot in this airplane. And like I said, I'm going to break this into multiple videos because it's just going to be too long to do it into one. Of course, after I've said everything, there's also the FMS, which it feels like an Airbus FMS, but it's got a couple other little kind of, I don't want to call, I'm going to call them simplifications over an Airbus FMS, which I think you folks will like. So as you can see, absolutely wild plane. Next time, we'll go ahead and do the whole startup procedure. I'll walk you through the different ways to do things electrically, and then we'll kind of continue on from there. Enjoy.